I didn't want to just, I guess, experience it, what this religion was and what you're supposed to do in terms of behavior. I wanted to follow it to understand why and how it could apply to me, and also, what this means in the grander scheme of understanding the world.
Hello, my name is Timothy Shinoni, and I'm excited to be hosting today's episode of Tea Time at the Seminary, a show where we have conversations with Orthodox Christians all while drinking our favorite cup of tea. I'm here at St. Photius Orthodox Theological Seminary in Etna, California, and I'm joined by a very special guest who was born and raised in the Tar Heel State, better known as North Carolina, and he's also a first-year student at this seminary. It's my pleasure to introduce you all to the recently baptized Jeffrey Chen. Thank you for coming onto the show, Jeffrey.
Oh, thank you, Timothy. I'm happy to be on, especially with such a talented person as you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be asking you a very difficult question. And that question is, what kind of tea would you like to drink? The first one is jasmine. The second one in the middle is Earl Grey. And the last one right next to me is lemon ginger.
I think I'll go with the lemon ginger.
Lemon ginger. All right. So you're going to go with lemon ginger. I'm going to go with probably Earl Grey. All right, so as I'm pouring your tea, Jeffrey, I'd like to ask you another question, and that question is, what convinced you to join SPOTS, and how much time did it take for you to decide?
Ooh, okay, that's another tough question. It's only tough because I don't know really nothing specific convinced me, and it was not like someone told me to go. In fact, I didn't know anyone here, and I'd already gone to college before. I went to UNC. So I was sort of just, I guess there was a point in my life where it was like a crossroads, or I guess there's multiple paths I could have taken. And I was thinking about what I could do and what my goals were and what I valued in life. And I'd already sort of learned a lot about Orthodox Christianity. I was a catechumen. So I thought one of the best, safest things to do in life would be to, I guess, build the fundamentals first before, I guess, presuming to do something else that you think would be best, because it could not be the best thing. It could be a naive move. So, and in terms of building the fundamentals, I thought there's no better place than to go to a place like this where you're, surrounded by very astute teachers, monastics, people who are fully immersed in the Christian life. And so you can really live as much as possible a Christian life with all the services and prayers and all the, I guess, theological basics that would be hard to get by yourself. I mean, you could do it, but it'd be harder. And also you have the community here and the people and the friends who would help along. So I decided it'd be a safe move to try that as like a first step, build the fundamentals first, and then I guess work through the rest of my life from that point on. But yeah, there's no specific goal I had coming in here. It was just a general idea of wanting to learn more and wanting to develop myself in the right direction at the minimum. And I haven't had any regrets, so it's been nice so far. Yeah, I never drink tea.
You never really drink tea?
Nope.
Do you drink coffee, or what kind of stuff do you usually drink?
No, I don't really drink coffee. I just drink water.
What are some things about Etna that you really like and you really appreciate? The town, that is.
Oh, first of all, I really do enjoy Etna. It's a very scenic place. That's the first thing I could think of. I mean, it's a valley, so you're surrounded by mountains. And so every day you can look out and see beautiful mountains and the trees and wildlife, and that's really nice. It's also a small town, and I guess I prefer smaller towns now that I've been here and gotten acquainted with it. It's nice and generally more quiet. It's more of like a low pressure environment, more peaceful, and the weather here is pretty good. It's not too cold and not too hot so far, and the drier climate, I actually like it compared to North Carolina. Although North Carolina is also just amazing, but it gets a bit too humid in the summer.
What was the point when you realized you wanted to be baptized?
Well, that wasn't a decision I made. It's a decision made by my spiritual father, Father Gregory, who is the spiritual director here, and so he talks to us, together and also individually, and we before we're baptized, we can just talk to him about our general thoughts, our questions, our concerns. And so he sort of gets a sense of where we're at and how we're developing. And then he sort of brought it up as a possibility at a certain point in time. And I was like, sure, why not? I've been a catechumen. Oh, I was a catechumen before being baptized for about 2.5 years. So I guess it was about time, and maybe I had learned enough of the basics and had built at least a basic routine that made me ready to get baptized. But I don't, it's definitely like a personal thing. It has to be discerned individually. So, and I had no part in discerning that. I was just sort of a passive person in that, and I just agreed because it seemed right to me. Yeah.
Seeing as you grew up, you weren't Orthodox growing up. You only became Orthodox later on in your life, fairly recently, I would assume. What were some of the challenges of becoming an Orthodox Christian in a country, United States of America, where Orthodox Christianity is not very well known? Most people don't know what Orthodox Christianity is.
Yeah. I mean, most people are like, what is Orthodox Christianity? Because they only know like Protestants and Catholics. I get the biggest challenge is, I mean, you don't even know you want to be Orthodox. You don't even know what it is. That's the biggest challenge. So most of my life, I didn't even know what it was. And I didn't even really look into Christianity much because my only exposure was, a few Protestant friends. And even then, I really didn't ask much. I wasn't that curious about it. Yeah, so I think the biggest problem is exposure to Orthodoxy, to see what it is. Because I think if a lot of people saw it, they would recognize that it is something deeper and more true and more meaningful. And also Orthodox Christians tend to live a Christian life as sort of a priority in their life more than just like a side thing. At least you'd hope. And so that was the main challenge. So most of my life, I didn't really hear about it. It wasn't until just a few years ago that I did hear about it. And even then, it's overwhelming at first. You don't really know what to think about it. It just sounds kind of mysterious. You see a lot of bearded people, and you're like, okay, that's my first impression of this. But I did a lot of reading, and that was challenging to sort of try to wrap my head around it by myself, just through self-studying and even, just the basics of theology and stuff like that. For someone who was never exposed to any of this ever before, it's just complicated. A lot of the things I read at first, I was just like, that seems very minor. Like, why are they arguing over like things about language? Like these heresies, they just seem like very minute little linguistic concerns. And like people are like getting into like huge, like, I guess, disputes over this, and like excommunicating and anathemas are being thrown. And like these are historical, like huge historical events causing councils. And at first I was like, oh, that just seems kind of weird to me, because I had no exposure to like religion at all, pretty much. But yeah, once you learn about church history and theology, it starts to make so much more sense. Like now I see why these issues were so important, because they deal with our salvation. Like our salvation is like a healing medicine for us, and we're sick, and you don't want that medicine to be formulated incorrectly. And sometimes medicines are really sensitive in their formulations. So you got to be really careful about, the dosage, the composition of what you're giving to the patient, and all that stuff. And this is stuff that's been passed down from the beginning of Christianity. And to distort it is actually very, very severe. And it actually has like second order, third order, fourth order effects on everything from lifestyle to art to ways of interacting with others. And of course, it just distorts your whole worldview. Such a small thing, it's like a domino effect. So now I see. And but yeah, that was one of the main stumbling blocks early on, aside from just learning about it in general. Oh, another thing was, when I first went to Orthodox services, it was overwhelming, very crazy, a lot of things going on. There's all your senses are just like being bombarded. There's like singing, there's incense, there's people doing crosses and like bowing, and there's people moving around. And of course, the services, for someone who's never been to a service before, just seem extremely confusing because you don't know what's going on, like the stages of a service. So for the longest time, I was totally just ignorant completely blind to what was going on, but just enjoying it, the service, and trying to, I guess, pray, because that's what you're supposed to do, and not be like a passive observer, like we're sort of inclined to do nowadays. Um, and I just say that because I watched TV a lot in my youth, so I guess my habit is just to go zone out and just stand there. So that was a huge challenge too, was absorbing all that overwhelming sensory and sort of mental stimulus, stimuli, and trying to parse it and make sense of all the meaning of what was going on. Because also, as someone who was not exposed before, making the sign of the cross it seemed weird to me. It's like, why are people doing that? And icons were weird to me. I don't know why people were venerating icons. That seemed weird. I'd never seen them before. It took a while, but pretty quickly I was, in the agape meal and stuff afterwards. I would be asking like hundreds of questions to people, just like, what is the sign of the cross? How do you do it? Why are your hands in this certain position? Some of the younger people I asked actually wouldn't know either, even if they've been to the church, been in the church for a while, and so it was cool to sort of just ask around and learn it from like the ground up, from like the very basics, sort of the most external things, as you can say, I guess, to a person from the outside, and then starting to put together all the connections of the meaning. Like, oh, these icons represent saints, and then these icons represent feast days, and feast days represent certain, parts in the lives, in the life of Christ in the Gospels, and there's a certain order to icons. There's an iconostasis or templon, and it's like ordered in a certain way, and then there's certain doors, and it starts to build, like it's like you're building a whole new world. And as long as you're, I guess, really deliberately trying to find the truth and trying to build it from the ground up and like understand the meaning behind things, and not just sort of piece it together in sort of like an external sort of I guess rule-based view, then it will start to, like, the meaning will start to connect, at least that's what happened for me. And I started to see things, like new things I'd ask about, like, for example, a certain theological idea expressed in an icon. It would connect to something from another icon or from another practice or from the sign of the cross, or, the two natures of Christ, or the three hypostases or something. Like, you'd start to make these basic theological connections of meaning across the world and across all the things you experience. And that's what happened to me. And so for many, many months, I was just like constantly getting my mind blown over and over. And that was probably just me like changing my worldview, because my old worldview was, I guess, based on things that are typical of like modern secular worldviews, which is, career, family, I don't know, knowledge, stuff like that. Sorry if that sounds bland, but people probably have more interesting worldviews than that, but that's the first thing I can think of. But the Christian worldview is really centered on God and Christ and the Logos, which, is his principle, like the principles of God are present everywhere. So you can sort of see from anything, you can sort of extract sort of allegorical or symbolic meaning, if you're good enough, and connect it back to a worldview that is a Christian worldview. I didn't want to just, I guess, experience it for the sake of following some sort of contrived idea of what this religion was and what you're supposed to do in terms of behavior. I wanted to follow it to understand why and how it could apply to me, and also, what this means in the grander scheme of understanding the world.
Now, I can actually say from my experience growing up, because I was Orthodox my whole life, yeah. I still am every day asking questions like, why do we prostrate at this one time? Yeah. Those type of things. So you'll probably always be doing that.
Yeah, and I still am. Likely. Yeah, I haven't stopped.
There are times. I'll give an example. Like when I was in Nigeria with Bishop Maximus, there were a few times where he would actually go up to the people and teach them basic traditions of Orthodoxy. And I'll admit there were times where I went, oh, so that's why we do that. Yeah. I didn't know a lot of stuff, and that's why it is very important to ask questions. And if you're a seminarian and you're at a seminary, it's the perfect place to do it.
Yeah, I better ask. And yeah, sometimes it's kind of funny because it seems like something so obvious, and I just get confused about it, or I do something wrong in the church, and I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't know. And it's so basic. Yeah. But that's just because I'm new and I'm learning a lot, and As you said, it's a constant process. I'm sure everyone has it for different things. Like for me, it's just like a lot of the basics. For other people who are more experienced, I'm sure there's lots of things they still learn about icons and about placement of icons. I mean, iconography is a whole world in itself, this symbolism, the whole language of icons is amazing. So,
have there been times in any of your classes where you kind of thought, wow, that just blows my mind. I never thought of it that way. Like, would you be able to recall a moment where that happened to you?
Yeah, one thing that I guess is a repeating pattern that is still sort of mind-blowing is the idea of paradoxes in Christianity. I guess like the uniting of opposites, or about things that seemingly in this world are opposed to each other. And it's just, I've noticed this pattern in Christianity and theology and in the Old Testament and the New Testament, where you learn about how God reconciles opposites in a mysterious way, which is incomprehensible, but also it makes sense. So that's the best way I can explain it, and I don't even understand it, so I'm not a theologian. But that's just fascinating to me. For example, like in the Old Testament, Moses sees the burning bush. It's a bush, but it's burning, but it's not. Well, I guess the best way to describe it is an unburnt bush, because it's like burning, but it's not burnt. So that's the paradox there, and that's a symbol of the Theotokos, Mary, who is a virgin who conceived and is a mother. That's another sort of paradox that's reconciled in God. And if you think about the life of Christ, I mean, he's the king and high priest, and yet he's the servant of everyone. That's another paradox. Or if you talk about like the transfiguration, or seeing the uncreated light. It's a light, but it's also an ineffable darkness, which is described by the church fathers. And something about these paradoxes, like I can understand both ends of them, like the two different ways of interpreting them, at least like I can at the surface level. But to get the idea that they sort of combine and then transcend the idea of just even like categories is fascinating to me, because I guess that's one of the things you learn in sort of dogmatic theology, is that God is not created. God is uncreated. And that's very related to this topic, because it's uncreated things transcend all created things. And so the created things, like us, like created beings, with our created human language, just cannot comprehend God and the things, these sort of lofty spiritual things, because we use created language and we think in language, and but yet we can sort of almost get a taste of it, like get a sense of it, but we can't like describe it really well, and that's why maybe I just sound like I'm ranting, but that's really fascinating to me, and that just stood out to me as something that's unique about Christianity, because I had never really thought about it before. Like you can't come to this conclusion just by thinking and reading and studying and just intellectual development. I mean, this is something that has to be revealed, and then that revelation is passed down to us through the writings of the church fathers, who have to use highly poetic and sometimes seemingly contradictory language. So you have to be very patient with it, or have very good teachers who can explain it to you in a very safe and just sort of, I guess, like spoon-fed way, bit by bit. Start with the milk and the honey, and then you start to be able to lift up your mind, sort of like ascending a ladder, from like the basic ideas to like more and more, I guess, exalted ideas, which is like closer to reality, I guess. So you start with the basics, and that's really a journey that I've started here. And I'm like looking at this ladder, and I'm like amazed. And also, it's something that I've never even thought of before, because that's concepts like this, you don't get them outside of Christianity.
So we're at the halfway point of the show now, and I'm going to be asking Jeffrey what kind of snack he would like to eat. So we have here in front of us 3 different types of snacks. We have banana chips, dates, and orange slices. Which one of these would you like to eat?
I like all of them, but if I had to make a choice, I'd choose dates.
Choose dates, okay.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Desert Fathers and dates?
I have. I heard there's some of them, that's all they ate was just dates.
Yeah, they just take like a handful and just go off during Lent.
Yeah. Oh, so in the spirit of the Desert Fathers, you're going to choose that.
I'm going to take these and run. I'm leaving right now.
Oh yeah,
Thank
well
you very
may
much.
take that right now. I think I'm just gonna pick up something as we're speaking. Just because I might want to try all three. Jeffrey,
Mhm.
how did you make Orthodox Christian friends when you became Orthodox, and who helped you on this journey of Orthodoxy?
I've noticed one thing's for sure is in Orthodox, in just going to services, Orthodoxy, it's a lot easier to make friends and make acquaintances with people. Everyone sort of has the same underlying interest, and I guess lifestyle things and culture. It's like a, you know, it's like a culture of its own, and so it's easier to make friends. There's a lot more similarities when you talk about everyday things, talk about challenges in life, temptations, uh, needing prayers, and also I've noticed like Christians tend to just be more open and just, I guess, honest when they're talking, which makes it easier to just build deeper relationships with them. Maybe it's just me, but that's something I've noticed. So I've made a lot of friends here, and that's just I guess, by nature of just being in a place where you see people often and you have to talk to them. And we tend to have at least some interests that are similar, and that's how friendships form. So it just sort of naturally happens when you're exposed to them. And I guess outside of here, I made quite a few friends too. Not, I mean, a few in just in church life, just from going to services on the weekends and talking to people afterwards and hanging out with them and asking them questions. I had a few good friends who I probably asked them like thousands of questions, and they were more experienced. They had read a lot, and they would just be delighted to answer me, and we became very good friends just through that, just through me asking questions. So when we'd talk, I'd just be asking them questions constantly, endlessly, about linguistic things, about parts of the service, about historical things, about why we do this now and why they didn't do it before, or why they did something before and we don't do it now, and like all the basic questions of the church, that they really helped answer a lot of them, and it was fun to discuss with them as well. And yeah, that was just those are really close friends that I think just formed just from me asking questions around after church, and they just happened to be very open to answering them and also very enthusiastic to do so. And we also happened to live relatively close to each other where I was, and so we hung out a lot. So yeah, so I'd say in general, it's just being in the same environment, especially a Christian environment, is very conducive to making friends in general. And it just happens naturally.
So when you got baptized and you became an Orthodox Christian, did you receive an icon of your patron saint?
Yeah. Actually, someone gifted to me an icon of Saint Ceolfrith, who's also known as Saint Geoffrey, and that's my patron saint. And most people probably don't know him because he's an English saint, and unfortunately, there's not much written about English saints. But he was the spiritual father and sort of mentor of the Venerable Bede, Saint Bede, and people know him because he wrote a very famous book on church history and stuff like that. So Saint Ceolfrith was sort of in his time, and I guess I should say Saint Geoffrey because that's my name. Yeah. That's the modern rendition of Ceolfrith, because Ceolfrith is hard to say.
Is that like Old English? Like why is it different?
Yeah, Ceolfrith became Geoffrey with like a G, which became Geoffrey with a J, which is my name. So I think that's just how the name transformed over time.
Did you consider any other saints to be your patron saint, or did you just kind of just said it's gonna be Geoffrey from the get-go?
Many people recommended Geoffrey, actually. Well, just close friends did, because they were just trying to find someone with the name, a saint with the name Geoffrey.
Yeah. And
they found him, and I kind of didn't really think about it too much. I mean, I read a little bit about him, and I was like, okay, that's Saint Geoffrey, that's cool. And I didn't have any special connection with any saints that was like super like popping out to me. And Saint Geoffrey was, the more I read about him, and it's hard to find, but I did find a lot more information about him and how he was an abbot of a double monastery of Wearmouth and Jarrow in Northumbria. And he was a very successful and very well-respected elder and abbot. And he really helped expand the monasteries to like their peak. He, organized a lot of their literature and writing. And he also worked closely with Saint Benedict Biscop, who was his predecessor as abbot, who traveled to Rome many times from England which is a crazy journey, I'm sure, and sort of carried over the tradition of Rome back at the back in the 600s to 700s, back to England, so they could practice true Orthodoxy in England. And so there really is a lot more to St. Jeffrey. It's just you got to dig for it.
How connected are you with the Chinese culture? And do you see a connection with Orthodox Christianity?
I'm relatively connected. My parents sort of passed on ideas, and they constantly teach me like Chinese proverbs or explain them or repeat them to me, either for warning or for chastisement or whatever they do. But I've learned a lot from them about Chinese culture, and I've also just done my own research just because I'm interested in ancient Chinese history, ancient Chinese philosophy. I mean, the Chinese culture is like really old. Unfortunately, like it's really hard to see it nowadays, but if you go back, you can rewind like 2,000 years or so, 1,000 years even, and see like the sort of the way they lived and the principles they upheld in their philosophies of the world. There are many principles of like Confucianism, for example, that while it was sort of like a more moral, practical philosophy, it did overlap in many ways with sort of Orthodox ideas, like respecting your elders, honoring your parents, stuff like that. And there's also a lot of ideas from Taoism, which sort of, I think a lot of the Taoists just went out to nature, kind of like hermits, and they just sort of observed nature and tried to draw principles, like the deepest principles from what their observations were, and sort of condense it and then convey it as wisdom. I've heard or read a lot of quotes from it that were translated, and they sound, some of them, of course, some of them are kind of like off, but some of them do sound very closely Orthodox in terms of treatment of others. Like one of them is like, always remember the good other people do for you, but forget the good that you do for others. That's a very Christian principle, to not like, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, right? That's what Christ says. So when we do almsgiving or something, we shouldn't be prideful about it, and we shouldn't be, we shouldn't lift up our own self-worth because of that, because that should be expected of us. That's basic to us, that we should be doing that all the time. So we shouldn't like be excessively patting ourselves in the back. Not that we can't just think that it's a good thing to do, because that's obviously how you continue to do it. But yeah, so like principles like that, obviously in the Christian context, you get a lot more value, like, and a lot more depth out of the interpretation of these parts of Scripture and these principles, because you have the history of the Church Fathers describing them, and you have all the Desert Fathers and all the other monastics, the Russian monastics. They all put this into practice, and then they like churn it out for you in a more easy to understand and practical manner, bit by bit, piece by piece, so you can sort of assemble it yourself, whereas in ancient philosophy,
Orthodox Christianity kind of completes the puzzle, basically.
Oh yeah, it's like the full picture. Like the other, I feel like other philosophies sort of kind of pick at it,
but there's something missing.
Yeah, there's always like depth that's missing, or maybe they're just a bit off in what they're saying, or they're not quite there. But yeah, I mean, I think it helped a lot, just sort of my understanding of Chinese culture and of the basic principles that were passed down. It did make it easier to see and accept. Not that I even needed, it wasn't a struggle to accept like the principles in the gospel. Like that just immediately resonated with me intuitively as the truth. And I can't explain it, but just intuitively it was true. And I could not argue with that in my head at all. It was just something of the heart, I guess. But the understanding of Chinese culture reinforced it, so to say. For example, like a lot of the parables and the teachings of Christ, I was like, oh, so this is like what I learned about before, but it's just simply true. Like it's applied in a more broader context. It's directed towards the truth rather than more just like a lot of proverbs in ancient cultures, like in China and stuff, are just accumulated wisdom, I guess, from practical experience. which means they're really helpful in just everyday life because they're like, compressed knowledge from the ages. But Christianity is just like the revealed truth. So it's like, the full picture, the full puzzle put together, whereas the other ones are just sort of like putting the other pieces of the puzzle and saying like, all right, this is a piece, and that's all we know. And then this is another piece, and that's all we know. Christianity is like assembling the whole thing, and it's all connected, and that's why they say you can study it forever and still not understand. And but it did reinforce it, because I could contrast the two and compare the two and see that one was the completion of the other. At least that was how I approached it.
So what would you say to people who say, well, you can be an Orthodox Christian, but it's just not for me? Or Orthodox Christianity is really only meant for maybe Russians or Greeks, but for everybody else, they can do something else.
About the nationality thing, I think a lot of people are aware that it's a problem when people they tie up Orthodoxy or, just Christianity with their ethnic culture, and they start to confuse the boundaries, I guess, or confuse the idea of the two, and it becomes something that causes conflict or resentment, or even just like a divergence within the church. And I remember reading something from Saint Nikolai of Ohrid or Zicha, of Zicha, and he said something like, when you have a farm of like animals or plants or crops or something, it's not the border that's valuable, it's the stuff inside the border. And you can apply that to a nation. It's not the nation that's sort of the top of the hierarchy, that's like the most important, the priority. It's the people. The nation serves the people, and the people are what make the nation the nation. And in that sense, you arrive at a more, I guess, safe conclusion, which is that Orthodoxy applies to people, not nations. That's my political spiel. but I really think, to take it more broadly, anyone can be Orthodox. And everyone, I guess, has the ability to walk on that path, and the path is there for everyone.
I want to say thank you so much for being a part of our show, Tea Time at the Seminary, and we really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for having me, and for the tea and the snacks. I might eat some of these other snacks too after the show. Yeah. But I appreciate it, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
I really enjoyed it too. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching this episode of Tea Time at the Seminary. If you like what you saw today, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel called St. Photius Orthodox Theological Seminary. Cheers.